Previously, in Hedge Knights, an ambitious plan was hatched to avert certain starvation in the upcoming winter. Farm fields would be converted to heated and darkened nutrifungus farms, and the northeast tree would house an external farm as well. The Atlas discovered that the periodic acidic smogs spread pollution in the glade, and the special trees were part of a waxing and waning cycle of cleaning the glade and being overrun by toxins. A deadly raid was repelled, nearly costing Megahoof's life, and Tangier and Lazarus fell in love. Episode 7: Famine. With much deliberation and heavy hearts, the squires realized that they will have to resort to hunting the wild creatures here in the Bison glade. There simply was not enough beer, ambrosia, and dried meat to last them until the first nutrifungus harvest. They promised one another that situations like these would be avoided in the future, and in fact, they would even set up a wildlife refuge. But in the meantime, they asked Araulco if he would be okay hunting for them, and Araulco agreed. Judea said that she would build a butcher table to maximize the yield from the creatures that they hunted, and that Araulco should bring the creatures that he hunted over to the air loop section of the base to keep the animals cold, but also protected from scavengers. Sapo had an idea of using some of the bones of animals they had killed in the past as a way to make stews and soups, and Megahoof thought that that was a fine idea. It wouldn't be delicious, but it would keep them going and stretch their meager rations. The bison were also starving, and they hatched a plan. The plan was to cycle the bison in and out of their pens, to manage their exposure to the pollution in such a way that the bison could graze the wild ripthorn in the hills, but then also be brought back to the pen and fed some of the hops that they had harvested the season previous. While the bison were out, another plan was hatched to utilize as much of the farmland as possible. The southern tilled section of the farm fields would be added to the nutrifungus farm, and the nutrifungus farm would expand even further out. This plan required both constructors and farmers to work quickly and diligently. And additionally, Tangier would be required to return to the coal hills because more hearths would be needed to keep the area warmed. Sapo thought it would be prudent to move a dedicated shelf outdoors into the cold for the meat that was harvested from the animals and the kills, to make sure that it wouldn't spoil. The Atlas would have to be very careful about the pollution exposure that the bison were submitted to. It wasn't safe for them to wander for too long, so they'd have to keep a close eye on their pack. For the first time since his arrival, Araulco felt the burden of responsibility to provide fresh meat for his newly adopted family. He had agreed to do the hunting on the behalf of others, but hunting rats in the dark was far more tedious and difficult than any of the hunting he used to do in his community. He wondered why the creatures here differed so greatly, and perhaps he'd bring up the differences to Megahoof's attention once the community's need for food had been met. An additional hearth was planned in order to heat the expansive fungal fields. The coastal elders would have certainly applauded the ambitious ingenuity of the squires. Life on the coast may have been safe, but it was also complacent, and ingenuity was in short supply. These squires have accomplished more in just a few short seasons than a generation could back home. Necessity was truly the mother of invention. Sapo took care to butcher the rats and waste rats that Araulco brought in from hunting, and to set their meat on the frozen racks outside. With the planned farm walls constructed, Lazarus wasted no time in sowing fungal spores into the warm and tilled soils. Working in the dark and in full armor was strenuous, but he managed to turn the soil and fertilize the spores with a dexterity few could match. Lazarus's heart filled with joy when Tangier offered to till the fields alongside his fieldwork. The two seldom were able to work together, and the company helps to pass the time. Despite the fear of running out of food, the two share stories of their childhood. Tangier recalled how as a young boy Lazarus would run around with a makeshift wooden sword and shield, pretending to be a noble knight of the golden age of the Ablet kingdoms. Lazarus promised Tangier that the true golden age was yet to come. The bisons had grazed long enough, and the toxins started to build up in their system. Ripthorn may be plentiful, but most of the crop that grow in the blighted ground poison the body, so limited access to blighted crops was the safest course of action. The group was also instructed to patrol the grounds of the keep and make sure that pollution wasn't creeping in. knowing that each smog could bring a new wave of pollution penetrating their slate walls meant that it would take a vigilant effort to keep the area clean and safe for them and their animals. The sterilization of Scorpius did not go well. Sapo had rushed the operation and done accidental harm. The low light and the cold temperatures made this delicate surgery difficult. Sapo also noticed that Lily had given birth once again. A new batch of hops would be used to make some alewort. Sapo was excited to offer this up to his friends, and then the remaining hops could be fed to the bison that were seeking shelter from the pollution. Madzi asked Megahoof if she could be the one to name the new bison, and Megahoof agreed. She said that she didn't have a name just yet, that she would sleep on it, and he said that would be okay. A small section of the slate roof collapsed upon the fungal farm. During the rushed renovations of farmland, the structural integrity of the roof hadn't been considered. Thankfully, nobody was hurt, and the solution was simple: just to build a single stone pillar. The rushed plan to expand the Nutrifungus farm left the farm a strange patchwork of ambrosia, tilled soil, and Nutrifungus sown in a hurry. The northeast farm had been fully cleaned of the pollution. Meghoof finished studying the sketches of casting iron into a stew pot. This would allow Sapo to cook bone broth soup. With all of the new hunting, Megahoof thought it prudent to understand leatherworking, to maybe make the best use out of the hides from the animals they hunt. The urgent renovations to the keep's farmland was nearly complete. All 3 sections were merged into one continuous field and heated by multiple hearths and a steam geyser. The farm spanned hundreds of spore pods and about 24 bushes of ambrosia stunted by the pitch black darkness. Sapo asked Madzi if she would like to help feed the bison the excess hops from last season's harvest. He intended to brew a batch of ale, but everything he didn't need could be offered to their woolly friends. She jumped at the opportunity. The major farming project had been finished. All of the surrounding farmland had been successfully converted to fungal farms. Hundreds of spores had been sown this season, and they were proud of their progress. Madzi decided to play a little game with the bison, rousing them from their sleep and rounding them up to relocate them closer to the keep's sturdy walls. Megahoof asked Tangier to construct a stew pot for Sapo's kitchen. Instead of having to cook the slimy fungus, they could attempt to boil it into mushroom stews, perhaps a more palatable way of nourishing themselves than the pan-seared spores they ate back home. Additionally, they could make good use of the bones from the butchery. Now was the time that Tangier would have to return to coal mining, and Lazarus felt really bad about this prospect. He decided to make her a fresh woolen toque to keep her warm and comfortable out in the hills. Some of the bison started showing signs of pollution, sickness, and they would have to be brought back to the pen. This was a very careful balancing act, and it was important not to get it wrong. Occasionally, bison would wander off deeper into the wilderness. If the adlets failed to notice in time, their precious pets would certainly be lost in the wild. Tangier was offered up a fresh woolen toque and set on out, but this time minding the northeastern hills, a little closer to home. The Adlets also wanted to rearrange their kitchen and to build better furniture. They had been dealing with essentially stump logs and rough tables for far too long. The initial floor plan was drawn up. It wasn't necessarily ideal, but then again, anything would be an improvement from the makeshift scullery they had thrown together upon arrival. A cluster of ambrosia bushes were spotted growing near the southern trees. Unfortunately, this was also the same location designated for polluted topsoil, so despite the opportunity to harvest even more ambrosia, there wasn't a better place to relocate the pollution. The Adlets now had survived over half of the winter, rationing out food carefully and monitoring their bison as they grazed the wilderness. Most of the work to address their faltering food stocks was behind them. The squires took this opportunity to tidy up their home and to make way for some much-needed renovations. The scope of the renovations would be modest at best, but Judea had mentioned wanting a table that most of them could convene at together. Each and every atlet in the cozy little keep decided in quiet unison to contribute to the reorganization of their stockpiles. Their synergistic cooperation hummed with a gentle energy. This energy is what brought them this far and would push them further still. With leather tanning better understood, Meghoof decided to go back to trying to understand engineering and alchemy. Now that space had been freed up for Judea to renovate the dining area, she contemplated her options. A larger table was necessary, but the area was irregular and difficult to plan for. She fussed with the layout, attempting to accommodate the space with visible frustration. She longed for a cathartic solution and realized she just needed to visualize what ideal she had in mind. She finally decided to construct walls and complete a little dining nook. This was a space she could share with her family. The lives they had been austere and uncomfortable, but this was not the life she wished for Bash. She wanted to spend her energy building a better childhood for him than she had for herself. Finally, their modest little keep started to feel a bit more like a proper home. The nutrifungus around the northeast tree wasn't fully mature, but it was just about ready to be harvested. As much as they wished they could wait for it to fully mature for the greatest yield, the Atlas knew they didn't have the time. They all shared the same sense of urgency, knowing how difficult it was for Araulco to hunt enough food for them to survive. With engineering understood, they would be able to make their own components. This was a great milestone for the Adlets. The Adlets could wait no longer. The nutrifungus would have to be harvested early. Their food stocks dwindled, and they started to rely on the ambrosia, which was simply not enough to keep them nourished. Sapo brought back the first harvest of nutrifungus. The plan was to make the nutrifungus into either finer meals mixed in with meat or mushroom soup. There wasn't time to allow for the tilling of the northeast farm. They were in a race against starvation. The mushroom soup wasn't as tasty as they had hoped, but it would nourish them throughout the winter. The bison were also out of hops to eat. War horns sounded once more. A smaller pack, but of well-armed visitors to the southwest. Meguv yelled orders for everybody to get inside, and for them to band together and form a hunting party for a first strike like they had done times before. Judea asked if Madsy could take care of Batch while she was away. She didn't have a lot of experience taking care of a baby, but she was eager to learn. Tangier switched her iron pick for an iron sword and readied the battlements for the visitors to attack. The bowmen got into position, ready for their first strike against the visitors. Some of the visitors were easy to lure out into the open. Meguv called for a tactical withdrawal. Tangier volunteered to keep watch with Madzi into the wee hours and would alert everybody else once the visitors planned to attack, giving everybody ample time to reach the battlements. A thick, rotten fog rolled into the forest valley, cloaking the hills where the raiders were last seen. The bowmen spring into action and ready themselves. Lazarus tells Tangier to rest. The wounds inflicted on the ranged visitors seemed to have slowed them down, and in the approach, the one with the axe and the one with the sword were in the vanguard, easy to pick off behind the arrow-looped walls. The remaining raiders were seen fleeing whence they came. Judea shouted to the others that she'd hunt them down and would leave no survivors. Judea headed south to find the ones that they had shot at previously, and to make sure that they were not to return back home to raid once again. The two that died right outside the gate would have to be dumped into the marsh. They were a bit too close and might get everyone else sick. But this raid went as smoothly as they could have hoped, and all visitors were easily dispatched. Pollution continues to creep in to the edges of the farm, and it will be difficult to keep the pollution at bay. As directed by Megahoof, Sapo is working on making tanning liquors, able to process the hides into proper leather for further use. Lazarus makes the call to start harvesting additional nutrifungus from the Northeast farm, even if it wasn't ripe and ready. They worry that the pollution and smog will roll in and destroy what little crops they had sown. The bison grow hungry, cooped up without any food to eat. And soon will need to be offered up some of the nutrifungus as well. It's difficult to split the food so many different ways, but the adlets have little choice. Another cycle of bringing the bison outside to graze. So far, the adlets have survived 2/3 of the winter. Thank you for tuning in to episode 7 of Hedge Knights. If you would like to support the channel, please consider liking, subscribing, sharing this content with your friends, or even becoming one of my Patreon patrons. Links can be found in the description of the video. If you would like to join my gaming community, Rhadamant.com or the description of this video have a link to Discord as well. Thank you so very much for watching. I'll catch you next episode. Farewell, my fellow adlet.